Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. Not only is it a choke point for the world economy, it is also showing to the entire world the limits of US military power. Now the US is not powerless either. In April, Trump pulled the UNO reverse card and imposed his own naval blockade on Iran's blockade. Are you keeping up?
Nobody's going to challenge the blockade.
But despite all the oil tankers being seized, it seems US warships simply cannot reopen the strategic passage using brute force. I mean, they tried last night and reportedly at least one US destroyer suffered from a massive UV-10 sunburn. And just to troll the Americans, the Iranians boarded and seized an oil tanker. All this raises the question, can the United States actually break through Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz? Mind you, all this mess is just to get to the situation antebellum before the war started. In this video, we're going to break down exactly why the US hasn't been able to force this strait open, what Iran is actually using to hold it shut, and what it would realistically take to end this. Because the answer is more complicated than anyone in the Pentagon wants to admit. Let's be real, the internet is like the modern battlefield with drones all around you. Every click, every scroll, you're being watched, tracked, and targeted. Unless you're covered by VPN. Then, you're invisible to the enemy. Huge thanks to CyberGhost VPN for sponsoring this video. CyberGhost routes your traffic through a secure, encrypted tunnel, keeping your IP hidden and your data private. And trust me, we've seen how pipelines and tunnels can change the course of a battle. Boys, instead of using the incognito window, please just turn on CyberGhost VPN before you browse. It encrypts and reroutes 100% of your traffic through their secure servers, so no one will ever know about your online activity. What's more, CyberGhost VPN doesn't keep logs, so not even themselves know what you do online. Just with a few clicks, you can change your virtual location. For example, from Canada, let's pick Australia. And that way you can instantly unlock geo-blocked content from tons of streaming services such as Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Disney+. You can even snatch better online deals and play games blocked in your region. One subscription covers up to 7 devices, so it's perfect for sharing with family and friends. CyberGhost works on all major platforms: Windows, Mac, Android, iOS, and even smart TVs and consoles. Right now they're offering an insane deal. $2.03 a month plus 4 months for free. That's 84% off, along with a 45-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 support. Join over 38 million users and grab your discount via the link in the description below. CyberGhost VPN will keep you safe. The reality is that the US has definitely underestimated Iran. So much so that here the Washington Post reported, Iran has hit far more US military assets than reported. You can imagine the shock on my face when I read that. According to the same article, 15 US military sites in the Middle East were targeted. When we look at the images, it's clear that the Iranian strikes were very precise. I mean, just look at that, there are no random craters indicating misses. Overall, Iranian missile and drone strikes have damaged or destroyed at least 228 structures or pieces of equipment since the war began, hitting hangars, barracks, fuel depots, aircraft, and key radar communications and air defense equipment. In this image alone, we can observe the damage inflicted on Camp Arifjan in Kuwait visible by March 4th. Now we understand why the US military suddenly demanded all satellite websites to stop publishing images from the Middle East. Iran also targeted soft targets such as gyms, food halls, and accommodation. The goal was clearly to inflict as many casualties on the US as possible, since public opinion is the center of gravity of their US adversary. By the 8th of April, reports indicated 13 US troops killed and more than 380 wounded during Operational Epic Fury. Of these wounded, approximately 67% were Army, 18% US Navy, 9.5% Air Force, and 5.5% were Marines. The fact that nearly 70% of the casualties came from the Army tells you something. It confirms that Iran was specifically targeting fixed US military installations in the region. And let's be honest, with quite some success. And mind you, these are official figures. The real casualties could be much higher. And there's this one detail that deserves its own moment. In the first days of the war, an old Iranian F-5, a jet designed in the 1950s, managed to bomb Camp Buring in Kuwait, a rare breach that marked the first time an enemy fixed-wing aircraft has struck an American military base in years. And this could directly be tied to the confusion that led to the friendly fire incident over Kuwait. And to top it all off, the US exhausted a large part of its inventory. If you're interested, I made a detailed video about it. But in my opinion, that's one of the main reasons behind the sudden ceasefire on April 8th. The US didn't stop because it wanted to. They had to because they simply ran out of ammunition. Now it's also important to mention that Iran got hit pretty hard. For example, this Twitter page by Ben Zion Makades did a deep dive on the damage to the Iranian ballistic missile array. The thread has 30 parts and covers one missile base after another, without even talking about the destruction on Iranian infrastructure or even the armed forces of Iran. But can we really speak of a US victory when a couple days ago, the Washington Post admitted that Iran retains about 75% of its pre-war inventories of mobile launchers and about 70% of its pre-war stockpiles of missiles? Now, hold on a second. In late March, the IDF told us that it destroyed or disabled 70% of Iran's missile launchers.
Oh, well.
Now we're told it's actually 25%. It's as if most of the targets destroyed were actually decoys. We were also told that Iran reduced its daily missile launchers because it was running out of ammo. Turns out they still have 70% of their pre-war inventory. What kind of scam is this? I mean, that's not all. It's been a month since the rescue of the two pilots. What are their names? Why haven't we seen pictures of these two heroes? Something is off. It's as if the rescue operation was just a cover-up. If I can be honest, all this just makes me question everything I've heard about history. If we're being lied to right now, with all the proof in our face, imagine all the BS that was written down in the past and that we just take for granted. Anyway, the US needed to find a way to continue the war without continuing the war. Like war with benefits, you know? That's how on the 13th of April 2026, the United States imposed a naval blockade on Iran, along this line 500 kilometers east of the Strait of Hormuz. Essentially, if Iran cannot export oil, their oil storage will reach full capacity. In that case, they will need to stop their oil production. This is bad because shutting down mature oil fields can permanently damage reservoirs, reduce underground pressure, clog wells and pipelines, and make restarting production slow, expensive, or even impossible at previous levels. Now, to enforce this blockade, the US military prepared to board the Iran-linked ships. On the 19th of April, the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit launched its first direct action and seized the Iranian-flagged vessel Tuska. It's also important to mention that the Tuska was seized in international waters. Oh, you think this is piracy, eh? Yes, because that's exactly what it is. Or rather, state-sponsored piracy. It's okay when we do it. Here's a list of some of the Iranian-linked oil tankers that US forces have intercepted and captured. And as you can see, some of them very far from Iran. Then on the 28th of April, we can see the 31st MU boarding the MV Blue Star 3, which was suspected of attempting to break through the US naval blockade of Iran. This maritime security mission is exactly what I talked about in one of my previous videos. This leads us to option 3, a simple maritime security mission. This is the lowest risk profile. Operations would center on small specialized boarding teams and maritime interdiction units. The US military claimed that it had completely halted Iranian trade. But according to Lloyd's list, at least 26 Iranian Shadow Fleet vessels managed to bypass the US blockade. And that report was from April 20th. Maybe other ships managed to break through since then. Nonetheless, the Iranians are slowly starting to feel the heat. There are increasing concerns that Iran could run out of crude oil storage capacity and be forced to slow down production. According to this graph from Kepler, Karg Island is approaching 75% capacity, and that was in late April. At the same time, satellites have detected a massive oil spill spreading across the vast area of the Persian Gulf around Iran's Karg Island. Could be an oil tanker that was hit, or maybe the Iranians are just releasing some extra oil to relieve their storage capacity. But then on May 7th, the Washington Post dropped this. US intelligence says Iran can outlast Trump's Hormuz blockade for months. Tehran is storing some of its oil aboard tanker ships that otherwise would be empty because of the blockade. At the same time, Iran is also decreasing the flows in its oil fields to ensure the wells remain functional. On top of that, there is a massive oil smuggling operation underway. Hundreds of pickup trucks are jammed at the Pakistani border. But relatively speaking, it's not a lot. At most, we're talking about 10 million liters of oil transiting that way towards Pakistan. In comparison, most common large ocean-going tankers can carry 300 to 350 million liters. That's why Iran is now ramping up trade with China via rail to bypass the US blockade. And of course, a coincidental byproduct of the US blockade is its impact on China. So let's see what the upcoming Trump-Xi summit will bring. So overall, the US blockade is kind of working. What I want you to understand is that history repeatedly demonstrated that economic blockades, however severe, often underestimate the adaptive capacity of targeted nations. Britain's naval blockade of Germany during World War I aimed to strangle the Central Powers by cutting off food, raw materials, and war supplies. While it contributed to genuine hardship, Germany endured over 4 years of pressure by developing substitute industries, rationing systems, and synthetic alternatives far longer than British planners anticipated. And thanks to the British blockade, that's how we got margarine and Ersatzkaffee. So until now, commercial ships had to go through the Iranian maritime toll booth between the islands of Qeshm and Larak. That's when, on May 4th, Trump announced Project Hail Mary. What do you mean it's already taken? I mean, Project Freedom. Essentially, the US military would escort commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz with guided missile destroyers and more than 100 land and sea-based aircraft. The message to Iran was clear. The US Navy would break the blockade once and for all. Iran didn't wait to flex its muscles. Iran also increased its interdiction zone way beyond the Strait of Hormuz, now encompassing the Emirati port of Fujairah, which, to no surprise, they targeted with drone strikes in the evening of May 4th. Obviously, this escorting mission also comes at a great risk for US warships.
The state media that a US warship has turned back from the area of the Strait of Hormuz.
One of the first threats is mines. This is why the US Navy brought Independence-class littoral combat ships that have dedicated anti-mine capabilities. But to do so, these LCSs will have to reach the Strait of Hormuz and expose themselves to Iranian missiles and drones. But as long as Iran doesn't spam a large number of those at US warships, they should be able to counter them. Whoops, I spoke too soon. More on that at the end of the video. Another threat is Iran's famous fast attack boats that could swarm some vessels. Now, these are all threats known to the US Navy. The real problem is unmanned surface vessels. We saw the damage they inflicted against Russia's Black Sea Fleet and how hard they are to detect. And then there are also unmanned underwater vehicles, essentially robotic submarines. Yeah, all these threats are starting to add up, especially in an area with very little room for maneuver. And obviously, the other problem of this escorting mission is that US warships will have to go back and forth across the Strait of Hormuz. And an incident is bound to happen. Nonetheless, the US military proposed a safe route along the Omani coastline. The US announced that 2 US-flagged merchant ships had successfully transited the Strait of Hormuz. Then the Danish shipping company Maersk confirmed that a vessel belonging to one of its subsidiaries managed to leave the Strait of Hormuz with US military escort. That was supposed to be the proof of concept. The US Navy was confident. Next up was the French-owned CMA CGM San Antonio.
It's a trap!
And boom, it was hit by Iranian projectiles. We don't have footage, we also don't know the location of the incident, probably to avoid publicly admitting that the US recommended route wasn't safe. But there's also a conspiracy. Maybe the US Navy did it on purpose that the French ship was alone and defenseless. Because now, surprise, surprise, the French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle is heading to the region. Anyway, as you can see, Operation Project Freedom was such a resounding success that Trump called it off 36 hours after it had started. just like when I'm trying to organize a road trip with the boys. Now, thanks to BroSynth, we were able to find the approximate location of US warships in the Gulf of Oman. We have a littoral combat ship off the coast of Oman, and another just 65 kilometers off the coast of Iran. And then covering the center, there's the San Antonio-class amphibious transport dock USS New Orleans, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, and a US Nimitz-class carrier. Allegedly, another destroyer was spotted just 48 kilometers off the coastline of Pakistan, and another in the center near the USS Nimitz. Personally, I think Iran could totally release huge loads of missiles and drones at these US warships. But they're edging. They're holding off the shots for something worth it. And trust me, they did. So despite the escort mission Project Freedom being stopped, the US blockade continued. On the 6th of May, according to CENTCOM, a US Navy FA-18 Super Hornet fired on an Iranian-flagged vessel attempting to breach the naval blockade, stating that the tanker is no longer transiting to Iran, after the rudder was hit by 20mm rounds fired from the jet's Gatling gun. And that's when Iran had enough of these games. On the night of May 7th, there was a new breach of the ceasefire. Iranian IRGC-affiliated outlet Fars News Agency reported explosions against port facilities in Qeshm Island and Bandar Abbas. At the same time, the Iranians published this footage of anti-ship missile launches against US warships in the Strait of Hormuz. Turns out the US Navy has been doing probing excursions through the Strait of Hormuz. CBS wrote, 3 US Navy destroyers transiting the Strait of Hormuz came under attack on Thursday, and the US carried out strikes on 2 Iranian ports abutting the strait. And this fits the reports from the Iranian side. That also explains why Rybar reported that the US had suddenly activated 3 E-11A airborne communication relay aircraft near the Iranian border. Now, the US claimed that the American destroyers USS Truxtun, USS Mason, and USS Rafael Peralta managed to push through the blockade without harm. But this is most likely not true. In this Iranian image, we can clearly see a burning ship in the distance. And then NASA firms showed multiple dots on fire in the Strait of Hormuz. 1 on the Iranian side and 2 dots on the Oman side of the crossing. Technically, that could mean 1 Iranian vessel was hit and 2 US destroyers. But then we got 5 dots. Some people suggested that it could be Iranian fast attack boats that were hit, plus 1 US destroyer. Others claimed it was rather the same warship that was drifting, and the fire on board was being picked up at different locations. According to me, that's the most likely scenario. But of course, we're not gonna get an official announcement by the US Navy. It's also strange that so many US Navy warships suddenly catch fire in this region. All accidents. We can also see how dozens upon dozens of IRGC speedboats intervened to prevent the US breakthrough. And it seems the attrition was quite severe for Iran. Every rainbow stains you can observe on the water is actually fuel slicks leaking from destroyed fast attack crafts. And I'm not done, because that same night, Iranian commandos managed to intercept, seize, and board the oil tanker Ocean Koi. And guess what? Just under the nose of the US Navy.
Hey yo, what the?
President Trump then told ABC News the ceasefire is still in effect despite the strikes on Iranian targets, which he described as just a love tap.
Right.
My friends, I think we're slowly approaching round 2 of the US-Iran war. As of now, the US blockade failed to compel Iran to stop its blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. And like we've seen, this operation could last for many more months. At the same time, the US had about a month to resupply its forces in the Middle East. That explains the never-ending military supply train of C-17s flying from the US to Germany and then to the Middle East. The USS Boxer with the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit is set to arrive within the next few days on the Iranian theater. And then we learned that Saudi Arabia and Kuwait lift curbs on US military access to bases and airspace. And all of a sudden, a squadron of Egyptian Air Force Rafale fighter jets has been deployed to the UAE. The pieces are moving back into position. That's all I have for you today, and see you in the next one.